Morning to you, October 18th. You're with Michael Crosby for POTUS. We're continuing forward with transition. Basically, be completely honest, it's not moving at the speeds we had hoped. It's really not moving at the speeds we'd hoped. And there are other problems. The other problems, of course, being is that aside from the normal learning situation involving transition, this situation is completely different because we have a presidential candidate panel that's also involved. And we have criminal charges of a very serious nature in large quantities concerning various parties and various members of the political spectrum. This makes things more difficult because we're talking about dealing with people who have basically committed archival violations of the most serious nature. The Constitution and Articles cover this, and this is actually an area on some of the charges that actually require the death penalty. These are items that are permanently stamped into our Constitution and Articles, along with the understanding of acts of war committed against the candidate, and the campaign. So this brings about a different situation, because you've never had a transition situation where it was just a transitional training, but there also has to be the security considerations as well as the processing for a presidential candidate panel. This is something that is in a territory where the legal processing will go beyond transition stages as they are considered for norm, no matter what. In other words, the normal transition is up to January 6th is when you have the ending of your transition and somebody's taking power. In this situation, it's completely different because you have the presidential candidate panel. You have criminal charges that are coming against people that still have to be processed. Again, the criminal charges will still have to be processed, and these are actually quite complex. Some of them still need additional investigations. This means it's going to take time to deal with all of the parties, because we have what would seem to be more than 90 major participants. We have 24 top participants. We have fringe work support participants. And now we're going into a number that exceeds 200. So this is something that is going to take a while to process. There are problems also because we have rebellion. We have rebellion basically. I mean, people have seen the items and the listed, declared, identified by Congress, the term insurrection. But we also have rebellion, and we have rebellion detected in both political parties. So this is a problem. This is a problem because we have to have ethics maintained, and we have to move forward in a complete ethical, reasonable manner, and we have to process many of these items. Now, unfortunately, among the various parties in rebellion, some of you may have noticed that there are numerous people that have been processed that have law enforcement connections. I mean, literally, you have people that are police and agents active that were at the J6 situation. And we have numerous convictions. See, there were more than 80 convictions in California where the parties were both connected basically as active law enforcement, and many other ones that have additional fringe connectivity. And this goes throughout the nation. The numbers are different depending on which state you're talking about. You have numerous participants in various states. You can look on the web. There's a listing on how many participants that way. But that, as an example, points out the difficulty of what we're looking at, because we're looking at rebellion in both political parties. I mean, I'm not talking about necessarily what would be considered third party candidate situations involving violence and activity. What I'm looking at basically is the two major party situation. And that would seem to be on the surface what concerns what has transpired and occurred in relation to acts of war committed against me, the campaign, the archives, etc. And of course, that is also where some of the death penalty charges lay, basically mandatory, constitutionally listed items of prescribed punishment. Now, this is, of course, difficult too. I do mention historically that it's actually rare for people to actually be executed. There are people who've went through the processes similar to this in different situations in the past historically, where they basically got processed and basically the charges got put up to considered straight out treason. And in some of the instances, you had parties that they were completely convicted, stripped of all rights, citizenship, ownership, etc. And the parties basically were given a mock firing squad. In other words, they went out there and they went through the process, and when the gunfire came down, it was a series of clicks, and this is because they removed the bullets from the firing squad. So they just basically left the parties to fend for themselves as somebody who's a stripped person without a country. Still others, charges were changed. Parties received imprisonment. You can do your historical research and see how some of that works. This situation deals again with national security violations far beyond the Rosenblums. And of course, you would know if you check the Rosenblum history, both of them were executed, put to death because of their actions. But there's a long list of items. If we drop down to smaller items, but it's crucial to understand that people did these things. You're talking about a lot of charges about, in the 4 to 10 year prison category sentence. You're also talking about additional types of considerations where some people would lose their retirement benefits, or actually everything above. In other words, they might have had a really nice retirement, and now what they're going to have when they retire is the absolute minimum of whatever Social Security will give them. So this is a situation with some of these different people. We have various other things where we have to deal with the participants, because the participants are both still at large, in many cases perceived still doing damage. In other words, activity. Also, the parties are attached or assigned or connected to crucial services, crucial government services. So this means that these parties have to be removed from having powers in those areas. It's crucially important for parties to be removed. And some of you may have noticed that I already did provide some disclosure as to the Julie Sue factor, Shirley Webb, the current AG of California, Kamala Harris's former activity as HE in California, and there's other items that go on. There's stuff connected to Trumpies, so to speak, and we're still awaiting. We're having difficulty with the situation because getting disclosure from the Justice Department is difficult when a lot of the information and evidence that we're seeking is already still locked into other active cases. So this is not that we necessarily can't get copies, but this is kind of investigations and development and determinations are still being determined, of which basically what we need is more of a finalization as to the determinations in some of these areas. It's important to have a deep understanding of where these things actually end up going before working with the material. Again, very disappointed that things have taken so long in those areas. I don't want to go into all of the areas on those because, again, a lot of what we're talking about is allegations respective to certain people in which investigations have not completely finished, which means that the witnesses that have given information and various other things, we're running into situations where parties don't want to cooperate. Again, that's part of the rebellion factor. And this, again, both party situation. So this is not that we can't make certain determinations, but we're also having parties refusing to adhere to the mandatory roles of certain other commitments, such as funding, because the United States guarantees all costs. This is a constitutional area that some people don't understand. When you have invasion, insurrection, rebellion, a presidential candidate declaring panel, all costs are covered, and we're having difficulty getting respect out of various agencies. We're not even getting full disclosure from some of these agencies on different items that we're looking for. We're talking about phone recordings involving clear felony activity recorded right on the phone, involving members of the justice system. And they don't want to turn this over because they know that we'll prosecute. This is a problem. We have these parties that want to invent different types of processes than the ones that are originally prescribed. In other words, they do not want to adhere and follow constitutional law respective to the original filing and powers recognition. Again, they're in rebellion. So this makes things difficult as to the various types of determinations, because there's also a lot of confusion as to certain charges, because lower judicial courts handle things differently and they would do different styles of charges. We have repeatedly tried getting items to be dealt with in some part at these levels, but the prosecutorial factor of these various lower levels have not been cooperating. I mentioned a situation that involved a case filing. There's been several case filings. Federal court where the judge demanded and was coercing, stating that he would not handle the case unless all criminal charges would be dropped. Well, that's coercion, and we can't do that. It's not allowed. The judge didn't just break and make an error of law. The judge committed a doozy right there. That's a big one, because we have archives that are under attack, and you don't just reduce everything. Basically wanted to reduce everything to a classification where they could spend 7-10 years stretching everything out, when the law is a mandate that says all of these certain key items must be resolved before the counting of delegates and or the certification is allowed. In other words, if they don't conclude what they're doing, their delegates can't be counted. And that's what we have definitely in the state of California. The state of California, we're processing paperwork right now, trying to make determinations of exactly the steps. I've essentially been nice about being public about how it works. I've talked with various people in government as to what the meaning of certain things are. We actually have people that are very concerned. The Secretary of State of California's office knows that they've had repeated situation. We go through the checklist. They know that there's a problem. They know this, and their situation is that they refuse to pay, basically. They're stating they do not have the kind of financial capability to compensate. I don't want to go into all the levels of the discussion, but the Secretary of State's office knows that they're in danger, basically that there is a foul registered. There are fouls registered, and that all the delegates of California basically are in the process of being impounded. They're all being seized because the state of California refuses to pay for the damage, because of their participation level percentage, which is the acknowledgement to every voter in the state of California as to what they did about the blacklisting of a candidate and by the way, this is not just one election period. This is multiple ballots. And this is 14 million voters that have to get in writing disclosure that is signed and certified and blatantly admitted by the Secretary of State saying, yes, the state screwed up. This occurred. The state parties, state members have done this. They don't want to turn over testimony against themselves. This is a problem. They don't have that option. That's not the way it works. And once again, that's not the way it works. So this is a problem because we have to, in order to get the campaign going back on the track that we're supposed to be, we have to restore 18 mobile broadcast RV archives. Essentially a total fleet. Around 40 vehicles in all. And we also have the damage process that we're the first to proclaim, the first to try to get out activated and going, yet we came under attack, as well as violent attack, multiple styles of attack. Julie Sue, again, people will, if they will research it, will find that she is been connected in conjunction with $31 billion in fraud by design. This is a very serious matter. This also has other connotations. I have gone public with the understanding that money was given to people who were non-citizens who were located outside the United States, who have used that money to enter into the United States. And in effect, because of I believe it's motor voter in certain states, that citizens have a right to vote if they live in the state a certain amount of time. So there are deep questions about this because, you can't just gunshot $31 billion and have $14 billion of it go outside the country and literally just bring in potentially 1 million plus people and have them end up becoming voters that are in a demographic that says that 80% of them will become voters and become Democrats. This is a foul. Again, this is a foul. This is election rigging. It's creative, but the reality is there nonetheless. Now, I have shared information with the United States Senate, some members of the Senate. I've disclosed publicly on X with some of this material. And again, it's a very complex situation to move forward because there are still dangers. Once again, there are violent parties, and I do repeat, there are violent parties that are still at large that have still not been apprehended. And we have prosecutorial agents that don't want to cooperate, that were notified, that we tried to work with all along the way, that refused to work with the situation. This, again, is very, very bad. Now, once again, many of you that may have seen some of my other material, you have seen the photographs, you have seen the type of violence, the damage to the vehicles, to the RVs, to the courier vehicles, to the laptops, the burglaries, the damage, the theft of documents. You have seen this. This photographic sharing of evidence is unmistakable and has been repeatedly shared on X. This is not AI generated stuff. I do have factors in areas where I do AI generated stuff. And I think it's clear to people when you can see the difference between evidence photos versus AI generated material. So again, the transition factor here has an understanding that's different. Again, it's completely different because we have an actual series of attacks. We have acts of war against a candidate. This processing will continue regardless of whether we occupy the White House. And the way things are currently going, we can technically still file. Depending on the candidate and circumstances, we can still file and say, no, these matters have not been resolved. They cannot take station at the White House. These matters have not been resolved. These parties need to be disqualified. So this is something that we're refusing to withdraw from. We're staying in transition. We're moving forward with transition. The fact that some parties don't want to cooperate with transition does not give them the opportunity to get up and grandstand and say that we're not trying to do transition aspects. These people would be lying, because then they're not doing their job. And there are a lot of different levels. I mentioned some of the other ones. We're not getting cooperation out of certain branches of government. This is a problem. And again, we stand for the highest ethics. And no matter, regardless of party, this is a constant ethic as a standard physical point that is non-movable. Our position remains solid. Our position remains solid, and we're not going to veer from that. So that having been said, I want to move on with some updates here. We got some stuff that's been posted here and there talking about Ukraine is getting ready to assemble their first nuclear weapon in a long time, to have a complete deliverable nuclear weapon. And this is, they claim that it's going to be done in weeks. That situation I've talked a little bit about before in the past. That there's people who are covering some documentary material on this. There are some people that are possibly in panic. I would not necessarily tell anybody to panic. Frankly, the position of Ukraine has been all along the way. They wanted border guarantees. Those border guarantees have to be honored. We have signed agreements. We must support them. This is non-negotiable. And when it comes to the understanding of nuclear weapons, I have personally done deep research into the situation of nuclear disarmament in Ukraine and the long period of time. There's been a lot of delays, a lot of waiting and refiling for financial assistance, for the decommissioning of certain types of materials. In effect, what does still remain is, as far as I can tell, some of the warheads and some of the fusionable material, the petroleums, has been captured by the Russians. It's unclear how much of it they've actually removed to other Russian territory. What would seem to be up in the air is that approximately 1,200 remaining warheads were not defueled. That is to say that the plutonium was not removed from the warheads. There are numerous surplus warheads that are in museums throughout their country. There are stockpiles of warheads that were slated to be used for educational purposes, I believe, most of them. And these items usually do not have all the components when they are showed at the museum. But as far as being able to reassemble warheads, that'd be easy. That's a done deal. But the thing is again, Ukraine doesn't want to be a nuclear power. Ukraine has zero interest in utilizing nuclear weapons. And as it turns out, basically totally disabling their nuclear weapons forces, which would have been 4,400 plus nuclear warheads total from the research that I came up with. Possibly 48. You have other supply chain items. That was probably a mistake to disable all of the nuclear weapons, because it probably would have added a deterrent as Russia was doing the big invasion, where they would have had an option to say, hey, look, you guys have to stop, or, we're going to unload, So that deterrent, I think, could have been more meaningful. But that's not the way things went. And the way things are is that repeatedly it's abundantly clear that Zelensky says, hey, look, we want NATO. Make no doubt about that at all. We want to be NATO. We don't need to be a nuclear entity. There's plenty of people that are nuclear entities, but we do, we want to be NATO. But there is a survival understanding from a tactical standpoint. I mean, I have no problem at all logically that provisions would have been made a long time back to be able to have retrofitting aspects, because there are different types of ways you can deliver nuclear weapons. They don't have to be missiles. And in fact, some of the missiles capable of delivering nuclear warheads were actually utilized for conventional attacks in response. Basically, Ukraine already used them. There are still others that can be pressed into service, repaired. But of course, again, the focus here is that Ukraine doesn't want anything to do with a being a nuclear power unless there's no choice. So, to me, it's perfectly predictable that they would have a series of emergency backups that would be making ready warheads for delivery and having some nuclear weapons return capability. But again, I want to say, don't panic. Tell people, don't panic. This is something it's predictable. It's something that's always been there. You have to remember the enormous restraint of all this Russian invasion activity. And the truth of the matter is that a warhead could have been put on an airplane at any given time and ran into an area and used as an attack, either in Ukrainian territory or even in Russian territory, basically. This is not a hard thing to do, actually. Not for Ukraine, because of the existing situation of the number of warheads that had not been decommissioned. Because it is a process. Some people don't understand it is a process. You decommission, you got to remove the plutonium. There's all of these processes are very complicated. And you have to do something with this stuff. You have to properly put it in the right containers. You have to make the plans for how it's going to be stored. This is a serious process. And there's a lot of money involved, a lot of labor, a lot of custom machining, a lot of money involved in doing this the right way. And that there was a backlog of warheads that did not get decommissioned. So they were fully operable. Now, please keep in mind that the process of maintaining warheads usually has a period where basically every 7 years a form of a recharge occurs. This is where basically the nuclear material is re-enhanced or swapped out for other material. So eventually what happens is these items would go inert, as the term, the word is, meaning basically no longer effective as a blast nuclear weapon as designed. However, there is a level of effectiveness where, let's say, for instance, well, it was a 1 megaton and it's no longer as effective, and it goes down to a 0.8 and then a 0.7 and then a 0.5, like that. So it becomes less and less effective. And eventually, when you have stuff that is 20 years old, 30 years old that hasn't been recharged, 30 years old, you might actually end up with a form of a nasty, dirty bomb. But of course, you can make a dirty bomb if you're any kind of nuclear power. If you have a nuclear reactor, you can take nuclear waste and make a nuclear dirty bomb, if that's what you want to do. But I wanted to just give a little information to people on that and reiterate that, in my view, there's no reason to panic, and that some of this would be perfectly normal activity for nation level, for some nations, to be able to have certain capabilities. So I'm not surprised at all that parties might find evidence that Ukraine is moving forward to reactivate and have a nuclear response capability. This is perfectly predictable, and not to me, not an alarm item. If anything, it's more of a leverage item towards giving more incentive for the Russians to give up this ridiculous adventure that they're having of all these bad thoughts, so to speak. It's time for the bad thoughts of the bear to stop, so to speak. Now, that having been said, I want to thank you very much for your time, and that is the update for today. And I hope the rest of your day goes well for you. Thank you very much. Michael Crosby for POTUS